Okay, today we have Albert LaFarge, a literary agent who is the head and owner of the Albert LaFarge Literary Agency. It's albertlafarge.com.
Hey
And
there, Phil. Hey, everybody.
so we're going to ask Albert about the role of the literary agent and his work in bringing work to publication. Welcome, Albert, and tell us a little bit about what a literary agent does.
Well, yeah, so you can go and look at my list of clients and the various books that I've been working on thelafargeagency.com. And that has quite a bit of information about the books and how I do my business. I have a small group of clients. It's maybe 3 or 4 dozen at this point. I've been in business since about 2003. I am really more like a freelancer working on behalf of individual clients than a big organization. Although over the years, soon after I founded the business, I got into league with 2 very important groups that helped me out. One in Hollywood, an attorney and an agency there that does book to movie and TV rights. And then in London, I have a co-agent, which is a bigger operation agency and connected to a bunch of, I don't know, several dozen co-agents around the world to do foreign and translation rights. So I'm a very small company doing intimate work with clients, building proposals into marketable, market-ready products that then get sold to publishers. And we exploit this bundle of rights, copyright, in as many ways as we can using this team. My team basically works on commission as I do. And we expand and contract depending on how much interest there is in a particular book over time. And I have books that have been published as long ago as 1956, and I have one coming out in a few weeks. And I try to pay attention to the needs of the author and the project throughout its life cycle.
Um, if we were to look on your list, Albert, what do you specialize in? What kind of book attracts you? What makes you take on a project?
So I like you, Phil, love poetry. I love fiction, and I also love narrative nonfiction and explanatory journalism and that kind of book, belletristic prose, you name it. But in terms of my practice, I focus almost entirely on nonfiction, and I work a lot with university presses, scholarly presses, so therefore with scholars, with specialists. And so I tend to work with writers on books that come from deep learning and are oriented, at least initially, to either a discipline or a particular constituency in or out of academia. And the hope is that the book has explained itself and presented the work elegantly enough so that not just that initial destination market, but a radiating circles of readers will become interested in a book. So it'll start out not as a specialized book so much but as a work of general interest that really has a main readership in mind, and that hopefully will transcend that. That's my goal. I also work with journalists. I have a couple of novelists and fiction writers on my list, but I really haven't done that in many years. And I work with publishers big and small. But the lion's share of my work is with publishers in the academy, university presses, and so on.
Maybe take us through, Albert, a particular project and kind of give us some insight into what you might do in order to promote and bring this book to publication.
Right. So of course it begins with a project that comes from a writer that I can see as a prospect for publication. I've worked with some clients for several books. I think I've sold 4 or 5 books now for 2 or 3 of my clients, over a period of years. And some of them take years between books. And so sometimes I see a project that's just a gleam in the eye of an author. Maybe it's just a tossed off comment or that I might seize on and say, hey, there's someone there. Or maybe it's something that they say, hey, I've been working for years on this. And so projects tend to start slow and then gain momentum. And so at some point I'll come in and we'll start to think about how can we put this material into a proposal that will have an outline, a brief definition of this, you know, a description, a sample chapter, and an analysis of the books that are out there that are competitive or comparable, and we'll put that into a package and try to dangle it in front of a group of editors who have budgets to buy books at mostly general interest or university press publishers, prime publishers. And it's almost like dangling a piece of bait in front of a fish, you know. And you hope that someone will nibble, right? And from there, you cross your fingers, because basically what I'm trying to do is I'm profiling. I have hundreds of editors who've come to my attention and who I've sort of trapped in databases and in my head. And I think, this person, you know, loves tennis, or this person has an interest in you know, the fair use provision of the copyright clause, or whatever it is that a book is about, you know, and you try to make a fit, you know. And this publisher really has a good list and such. And of course, with university presses, they have discipline specific lists that tend to support projects, and it's a little bit easier to connect those dots. With literature, it's a little harder. Editors, you can have several editors at a company who might be right for a book. And so I'm trying to play matchmaker. And if I get a tug on that line, that's when the real action begins. If I get more than one tug on the line, then I have the ability to manipulate those interested editors into competing against each other, both on money terms and just to negotiate a package for the author, financial package, compensation package for the author. And then we work on the license, which is, as I say, a bundle of rights that are being exploited by a primary publisher. And I might sell them all the territories, world rights with translation, or I might just sell them North America. We typically sell for the term of copyright, which is a very long time, as you know, death plus 70 years by default. We might sell them audio rights. We might keep those rights. We have a conversation and we have a haggling session, and then the book is signed and the author at some point is going to deliver, right? And we see that process through the press. I have my client Peter Fox Penner is on the verge of publication, and I've been talking with him and his publicists about how do we get that book out to the widest world. He's done a couple of podcasts. He's got an op-ed coming with a major newspaper. And I saw an article that was related to his book, and I said, hey, let's go out to that journalist, you know? And he says, oh yeah, I met him at a conference, right? So he's going to go, and the publicist is ready to send a book, and we're going to try to get him, you know, we're sort of positioning him in most visible places we can. So I can sort of help in that, but at some point I've handed that process over to the publicist and the rights department and the editors and the sales department and all those people at the publishing company who are going to get that book out as much as they can. And then I sort of stand in support, and I'm prodding occasionally. I'm saying, hey, don't forget to cut that check. You know, I'm doing all those things on behalf of the author, but really I'm just, I joke about this bittersweet moment that happens at some moment when I hand over the primary reins of a book's fate to an editor, who hopefully I've chosen very carefully. And I say bittersweet because it's a wonderful moment, because I'm handing someone that I trust over to somebody that I trust. And I'm hoping that they're going to, you know, make beautiful music together, basically. But it's also a loss for me and for my client, because we've had this intimate job of working on refining a proposal, you know. And it's not that we're saying goodbye, but there's a handing over of the reins. And so that's really what I do. And I try to come in when I'm necessary, when I can be useful, and grease the wheels, really.
Albert, you mentioned that you might come across a project at any stage, maybe just a comment made by someone that you meet, or a proposal. What about for, say, a young writer who doesn't have access? How would a young writer get to an agent like yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, starting a career is so hard. It's so easy to sell the next book by, you know, John Grisham or whatever. But all of those, Stephen King, you know, they all started somewhere. they basically started from a place where nobody knew their name. And you have to wow somebody. You have to kind of turn somebody's head. And the first thing that an unknown writer has to do in order to get published is really to turn an agent's head, or maybe to turn an editor's head at a publishing company. And that's super hard because we are seeing so many proposals, and we're trying to sort through an inundation, really a true inundation, digital mostly, of people with really interesting things to say. And I think the best way to do that is to say, hey, look, I've already done this. That the biggest trick we have is, hey, look what I've already done for you lately. I've written this fantastic blog post that only 6 people have read. But if you look at it, you'll see how great it is, right? I haven't gone viral yet, but, right? It's easy to sell someone who's already gone viral, right? Everybody sees the logic of extending that brand. The creating of a viral brand, I use that viral term, you know, a different way than
has a little different meaning than it used to have.
In this pandemic. But the mechanism, maybe you could say that the metaphor is more vital than ever now. That getting this contagious enthusiasm, this infectious, energy, to use these awful words, that's the goal. And nobody can do that for an author. Nobody can. And basically, so the people who you look around and you see, who do I admire? Who do I succeed? Who's really out there? Those people have brought a combination of ambition, of failing better, of resilience, of creativity, of course, of intelligence, perspiration, all that stuff. And really, you have to kind of have everything. Perspiration being 99%. But get yourself out there, get yourself out in a small way, get yourself noticed, study the success stories of other people. J.K. Rowling famously sent her book around to every London agent. And what's this guy? I think his name is Christopher Little. I may have this facts wrong, but it's agent in London, this looks all right. Threw it in the trash, right? And his assistant came around and said, oh, hey, that's a neat looking binder. Maybe I should save the, packet. And she started reading. She said, wow, this is amazing, And so she was saved from oblivion. And now Christopher Little, her agent, is, almost as rich as the Queen, So, and J.K. Rowling is richer than the Queen, but she was on welfare at the time, And so, you just have to find those opportunities. It's not so much about bothering people. It's about sort of tapping people on the shoulder and say, hey, I've got this thing where you just take a quick look. So, we say front load on your pitch. Say the thing that's most appealing. My article in the Guardian went viral. I have a book, or something that can kind of catch us and see you've made some headway into the mass world, into the wider world, into an intellectual community, into a discipline. I'm a professor, at UC Overshoe, and I am developing this theory, and I've put out this paper. And I have a way of explaining it, and it's fascinating. Whatever it is. Does that answer your question, Phil? It's such a hard question.
It's such a hard question, and I think we both recognize the fact that the most difficult paradox for those of us who are involved with writers as publishers or editors or agents is the fact that writing is such an incredibly profoundly intimate experience for the writer. And yet we experience it in a mass quantity. In other words, we're getting, either myself as an editor or you as an agent, we're getting so many submissions that we don't have the opportunity to treat it with each project with that specialness. We've got to get through the submissions. Yeah. And I think that, of course, young writers, importantly, they are protected from that knowledge. In fact, I think it's important not to have that knowledge until you're ready to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is why I think it's a good thing, to when we talk about the residency at Wilkes, you come to that meeting with a group of people who've already got their manuscript completed. I think it would be much less effective if you came, say, in the beginning and told everybody this and that made them realize, holy Toledo, I haven't done anything. You know, I don't have any of the qualifications that Mr. LaFarge is seeking.
Yes.
So it's an interesting kind of dance, you know, between that profound intimacy, that the almost the solipsistic need to do something, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, the ability to be savvy and to recognize that you're one of many, many, many people who are attempting to get the attention of the literary world through an agent.
Absolutely.
So I guess it's just in terms of a practical thing. Let's imagine for a moment that, you know, I'm a young writer who has finished a manuscript. You know, as many MA and MFA students, you know, they've got their manuscript, and maybe they haven't been thinking so much about publication. They've been working on their craft. And as you've pointed out, you know, that what they should do now is to front load their whatever accomplishments they may have. But let's just say that they're a person, you know, who may not have yet a lot of accomplishments. How would you craft that introduction for that person? You know, is there any kind of way where at the very least they don't disqualify themselves from the attention of an agent?
Right. Well, you know, so much of what you just said is right, and particularly with respect to fiction, just limiting us now to say you've written a first novel. It's so much, you mentioned the word dance, and it's so much about choreography and timing. And all of publishing is about appropriate timing and finding that moment when you're at the right stage to appeal to someone. And when you've written a novel, you pretty much have to have the whole thing done before even an agent, much less a commercial editor, will be willing to evaluate it. And I think there's some really good reasons for that. Primarily that every writer, no matter how good, including many professional published writers, including people who have won Pulitzers and Nobel Prizes, have figured out ways to write brilliant novels that fall apart in the last chapter. And if you do that, and publishers are very skeptical that you've written a great first chapter, you've come up with a terrific setting, right? But then so you really need to have that whole thing. So you need to be out there beyond our ken for years before you even make yourself present to us. I mean, George V. Higgins, who I have the honor of representing as his estate representative, and whom I had the honor of working with in many capacities over years before he died in 1999, used to joke about the fact that he wrote as an assistant district attorney in Massachusetts, and then as a lawyer, he wrote like 17 novels. And then the 18th novel he sent to Ashbel Green in 1970 through the slush pile at Alfred Knopf. And for some reason, and he wrote a great cover letter, by the way, to Ash. And Ash pulled it out of the slush and said, okay, I'm going to publish this. And the title of the book was The Friends of Eddie Coyle. It was made into a movie and it launched his career. And the press loved it. And they said, he's an overnight success. He said, that's the longest night of my life. The first thing he did after the contract was signed, he says, is go to he went to the transfer station and he buried all of his old manuscripts. And he waited until watched them get plowed under, you know. And so somehow he was able to catch Ashbel Green, one of the great book editors, you know, in our history, at the moment when he was ready and Ash was ready, you know. And that's so important. So what can you do with your letter? You can write a funny cover letter. You can come up with a really good title, you know, that says what the book's about, but also just teases you, right? You can make that first chapter really wonderful. You can send, in addition to the whole novel, as I say, a clever reduction, a treatment, a synopsis. It shouldn't be dry and boring. It has to have the facts, but it also is a showcase for your talents and your style. I show my students actually in the notebooks of Henry James, there's this wonderful treatment that they discovered for the ambassadors If you know that novel, it's, you know, a lot of people think it's James's best novel. Obviously, he wrote a lot of great ones, but he wrote basically a long proposal for the novel, and he sent it to his publisher, and he never got it back. But it was found later, and it's in the, as I say, it's in the notebooks edited by Adel, and it's an amazing document because it absolutely shows the characters in their fullness, and it demonstrates how the novel's going to work. It's about maybe as long as 15 to 20,000 words. So it's longer than a proposal, you know, is typically, but it's also like a miniaturization of the novel. And if you've read the novel and then you read it, it's a fascinating reduction. But of course he wrote it before the novel was written. Another thing you can do is write the whole novel and reduce it. But in this case, he actually used it as the basis for the novel. It was like his working notes. And if you create something like that, that is wonderful in itself, you have given your editors a way of telescoping what you're doing and also enjoying themselves and giving them really a memorandum at the same time. And so I really favor that, especially in a literary belletristic mode, something that in itself is a genre, a literary genre, but it's a reduction, you know? And so for me, I'll always have this pair of works, The Ambassadors by Henry James, which I strongly recommend, and this notebook entry, which is, as I say, very long. And he tells about how he was sitting in a garden in Paris, and he was looking into the courtyard, and he had a motion, he had a thought, he had a passing blip of insight. And he basically built the whole novel around this one moment, you know? So talk about starting small and building, and knowing when to show your pieces to the world and knowing who to show them to when. And so he managed to find that right person who knew. He was in a relationship already with the publisher, but he knew that if he showed that document to that person, that he would get a contract, you know, or he felt like that was the way of maximizing his chances. So you have to sort of think along those lines. Even for someone as far along in his career as James was at the time, he was still thinking about, how do I keep those people engaged, right, in the maximum way? And then he followed up with this brilliant novel. So all of that is required. Don't try this at home. No, seriously. The more you think along those terms, the more you'll maybe grow in your confidence, you know?
Right. Thank you so much, Albert. This has been a wonderful opportunity for students to get to know what that world is like, and we really appreciate all the work you do.
Well, good luck to you all, and I hope to get to know some of you someday.
Okay. Thanks, Albert.
Great to see you, Phil. Take care.
You too, Albert. See you. Bye.